From the time you are a little kid, just sitting in a classroom, you're sold this very specific, beautiful picture of how the world is supposed to operate.
Right, the whole perfect harmony ideal.
Exactly. You are taught that the ultimate goal of human interaction is just that, perfect harmony. We're supposed to be team players, we're supposed to seek consensus, compromise at every turn, and crucially, we're supposed to smile while doing it.
Oh yeah, always smiling.
Right. It's basically a rigorous, lifelong training program for peace.
Which, is a lovely ideal for a utopian society, but it leaves an individual entirely unprepared for the reality of what actually confronts them the moment they step into a competitive environment.
Because beneath that polite, civilized exterior, the real world you face every single day, whether it's in your career, your social circles, or even just in your own head, it's a subtle, ongoing war.
It really is.
And acknowledging that harsh truth is the starting point for our deep dive today into the source material. We're looking at excerpts from Robert Greene's The 33 Strategies of War. Now, just to be clear up front, the mission here isn't to convert you into some ruthless warmonger.
No, definitely not. We don't want you viewing every coworker as collateral damage or anything like that.
Exactly.
The real intent here is to arm you with a specific type of rationality. The goal is to cultivate the psychological mastery of a grand strategist.
So you can actually navigate those subtle, unspoken conflicts that are already happening all around you, whether you choose to acknowledge them or not.
Precisely. And to set the philosophical stage for this, the sources look back to ancient Greece. They point out that the Greeks actually had two entirely different gods to represent warfare.
Which is such a fascinating distinction.
It is, and it's vital to understand. So first, you have Ares. Now, Ares represents brutal, bloody, emotional warfare.
He's the guy who just lashes out.
Exactly. He's the embodiment of the soldier who fights in pure anger, driven entirely by ego and instinct. And the ancient Greeks actually despised Ares.
But then you have the other side of the coin.
Right. You have Athena. Athena is the goddess of strategic, intelligent, and highly calculated conflict. She doesn't fight out of rage or this blinding need to dominate.
She fights with supreme rationality.
Yes.
Yeah.
She operates from a place of foresight, always playing several moves ahead of her opponent.
And the application of Athena's wisdom in today's deep dive is strictly internal. We aren't analyzing how to conquer a neighboring territory or ruin a rival company.
No, we're aiming those strategic arrows at ourselves first.
Exactly. We are taking the arrows of Athena and aiming them at our own psychological blind spots. Because, as the text emphasizes, if your mind is easily hijacked by emotion, or if you are stubbornly clinging to the past, any external strategy you attempt in the real world is just going to collapse.
Right. And if daily life is an ongoing series of these subtle battles, the absolute foundational maneuver is identifying who or what you're actually pushing against.
You have to know who you're fighting.
You cannot navigate a ship without a compass. And in the realm of strategy, your enemy, or the opposing force, that functions as your compass. This concept is referred to in the text as the polarity strategy.
And the source material illustrates this with just a phenomenal historical case study. It's from 401 BC, involving Xenophon and an army of 10,000 Greek mercenaries?
Yeah, consider the psychological state of those men for a second. They had been hired to fight in a Persian civil war purely for financial gain.
Just a paycheck.
Exactly. But the campaign goes catastrophically wrong. They find themselves stranded deep in the heart of the Persian Empire.
Which is terrifying.
Oh, absolutely. And then their commanding officers are lured into a diplomatic meeting, betrayed, and literally beheaded by the Persians.
Wow.
So these 10,000 surviving soldiers, they are surrounded by hostile forces 1,000 miles from the coast with zero logistical support.
And their immediate reaction, which I think is so telling, isn't some heroic movie-style banding together. They experience a total psychological collapse.
They just break down.
Yeah, they sit in the dirt, completely paralyzed by despair, bickering over petty grievances. They're completely devoid of direction.
And Xenophon's diagnosis of that paralysis is what makes this a masterclass in strategy. He realizes that the physical barrier keeping them from getting home isn't the vast Persian army.
Or the mountains, or the hostile terrain.
Right. The primary barrier is their own muddled minds. They had completely lost their sense of identity.
Because without leaders and without a paycheck, they weren't an army anymore.
They were just confused, frightened individuals waiting to die.
So Xenophon understands he has to fundamentally alter their psychology. He calls the remaining junior officers together and essentially states that all attempts at negotiation have to end immediately.
He draws a hard line.
A completely hard line. He declares a merciless, unparleying war on the treacherous Persians. He actually burns the wagons and the supplies to prove there is no going back.
There is no peaceful compromise available.
None.
And by doing that, he manufactures a polarity. He paints the Persians as the ultimate faithless enemy, the absolute antithesis of civilized Greek values.
It wasn't just about making them angry, though, right?
No, not at all. It's about giving them immense clarity. He transforms them from an aimless mob back into a highly motivated, unified force. They marched all the way back to Greece, surviving impossible odds, simply because they finally possessed a unifying purpose.
They knew exactly who they were by defining exactly who they opposed.
Exactly.
Now, the sources map that ancient battlefield dynamic onto a modern political landscape to show how this works, without actual swords. They look at Margaret Thatcher's rise in the 1970s.
Right.
And I'll pause here just to explicitly remind you, the listener, that we're looking purely at her strategic maneuvers. We are completely setting aside any political bias or endorsement of her ideology. We're just impartially reporting on the strategy from the text.
Absolutely. Strictly looking at the mechanics of what she did.
Right. So when she assumed leadership of the Conservative Party, she was a profound outsider. She was a middle-class woman operating in a political sphere entirely dominated by wealthy, aristocratic men.
And the conventional wisdom for someone in that vulnerable position is to blend in, right? To conciliate, make allies, soften your edges.
But she took the exact opposite approach.
She actively weaponized her outsider status. She deliberately polarized the electorate and the political establishment.
She picked loud, highly visible fights.
Yes. And not just with the opposition party, but with the moderate, compromising men within her own ranks. The people she derisively labeled the wets.
But I want to push back on that a little bit. Why does that polarization actually work? I mean, it seems counterintuitive to alienate people when your whole goal is to win votes.
Well, it works because human beings are fundamentally tribal. We form significantly stronger bonds with our in-group when we perceive a clear, defining threat from an out-group.
So it's about drawing lines.
Exactly. By drawing incredibly sharp ideological lines and creating visible enemies, Thatcher wasn't just being combative for the sake of it. She was basically hacking human sociology.
Wow.
She used that friction to manufacture a fiercely loyal support base that felt they were fighting a crusade rather than just, supporting a politician.
Okay, but if we map that onto modern behavior, I really have to point out a major complication here. Constantly seeking out enemies and polarizing every issue, isn't that exactly what makes modern life, especially the internet, so incredibly toxic? It just feels like a recipe for perpetual misery.
That is a crucial distinction to make. The polarity strategy is not about adopting a state of paranoid delusion. You're not supposed to walk around picking petty fights with your neighbors or your coworkers.
Right, it's not about being a jerk.
Not at all. It is about defining your core identity and your boundaries by clearly understanding what you refuse to tolerate.
Okay, that makes sense.
Because if you attempt to occupy the absolute center on every issue, perpetually trying to please everyone, you actually erode your sense of self. You sink into this vague, mushy middle ground where you have no leverage.
And no room to maneuver because no one knows what you actually stand for.
Exactly.
Let's translate this into an everyday application, like, say, navigating toxic office politics. If you try to be a chameleon, smiling and agreeing with every single faction in the office, you inevitably become a victim of passive-aggressive maneuvering.
Guaranteed.
You are continually undermined, but you don't know who is holding the knife because everyone is pretending to be your friend.
You're operating in a fog. You really need a mechanism to force those hidden dynamics into the light.
And the text highlights a brilliant example of this from the biblical story of David and King Saul. So David suspects that his father-in-law, King Saul, secretly harbors a desire to kill him, even though Saul is acting totally cordial.
Right. On the surface, everything's fine.
Yeah, so David sets a trap using ambiguity. He tells his friend Jonathan, who happens to be Saul's son, to offer the king a vague, slightly impolite excuse for why David will be absent from an important royal feast.
And the psychology of that test is just elegant. Because if Saul's intentions toward David are genuinely peaceful, a minor breach of etiquette will only provoke, mild annoyance.
It's a little irritation.
Right. But because Saul harbors a deep, repressed hatred, that slight excuse acts as a catalyst. It pushes him over the edge into a terrifying, murderous rage.
By subtly testing the boundary, David forced the snake into the open.
He used a minor manufactured conflict to gain absolute clarity about his environment.
Okay, so applying that polarity gives you clarity. You locate your enemy, you identify the opposing force, and the fog lifts. But the text points out that this newfound clarity actually introduces a dangerous secondary trap.
It does.
The moment you clearly see the enemy, your brain's immediate lazy instinct is to attack them using whatever weapon or method brought you success the last time.
Which brings us to the concept of the guerrilla war of the mind. As the source material argues, your past successes are frequently your most significant psychological obstacle.
That is such a counterintuitive idea.
It is, but relying on what worked yesterday is actually the fastest way to lose the war of today.
And this brings up that terrifying historical parallel in the sources regarding the Prussian army of 1806.
Yes, the Prussians.
Going into that year, the Prussians were the undisputed masters of war. I mean, they were universally considered the most disciplined, perfectly tuned military machine in Europe.
Oh, they were legendary.
Yeah, and they were operating entirely on the victorious formulas developed by Frederick the Great decades earlier.
They possessed a perfect system. But the problem was, the context of the world had fundamentally shifted. They found themselves facing Napoleon at the Battle of Jena.
And their leadership was well past their prime.
Right. Exactly. The Prussian command structure consisted of men in their 60s and 70s, like Prince Hohenlohe. In the days leading up to the battle, these generals literally spent their time fiercely debating which of Frederick the Great's classic geometric formations to deploy.
Wow.
They marched out onto the battlefield in magnificent, slow-moving parade formations. They even had drum majors beating out the exact cadence.
Which is insane because they were basically fighting a ghost. They were fighting the war of 1750, not 1806, and they walked right into a slaughter.
Napoleon's forces did not respect those geometric rules.
Napoleon's soldiers didn't rely on massive, slow supply trains. They carried their own provisions in packs so they could move with terrifying fluid speed. They broke formation, hid behind walls, fired from rooftops.
They essentially picked the magnificent Prussian machine apart.
The Prussian army literally collapsed psychologically before they collapsed physically, because they just could not comprehend a reality that refused to adhere to their outdated formulas.
And the great philosopher of war, Karl von Clausewitz, he coined a really profound term for this phenomenon. He called it friction.
Friction.
Right. Friction isn't just a synonym for reality. It is the compounding nature of small, unpredictable variables. It's a sudden change in the weather, a messenger whose horse breaks a leg, a misunderstood order, a panicked battalion.
And rigid systems, like the Prussian army, they demand absolute perfection to function.
Which makes them highly brittle. When you rely on a past formula, you lack the flexibility to absorb friction.
So to understand how to actively counter that rigidity, the text introduces us to Miyamoto Musashi, widely considered Japan's greatest swordsman.
He really is the ultimate anti-Prussian.
Totally. His defining characteristic wasn't a specific secret sword technique. His secret was that he aggressively refused to possess a signature style.
He treated every single duel as an entirely unique puzzle. He adapted his methodology completely to the specific psychology and weaponry of the opponent standing right in front of him.
And the examples the sources give are incredible, like when he faces a master named Bacon.
Right, the guy with the chain and sickle weapon.
Yes, a terrifying weapon. It's designed to entangle an opponent's sword with the chain while the sickle strikes the neck. But instead of relying on his traditional single sword training, Musashi adapts instantly.
He draws two swords.
Exactly. He uses the shorter blade to catch and pin the chain, which leaves the longer blade completely free to deliver the fatal strike.
But the true masterpiece of psychological adaptation is his famous duel with Sasaki Ganryu.
Oh, this one is wild.
Ganryu was this elegant, highly traditional aristocrat who fought with a magnificent, unnaturally long sword. He was deeply attached to the formalities and protocols of samurai combat.
And knowing Ganryu's reliance on protocol, Musashi attacks his mind before the swords ever even cross.
He completely unbalances him.
Yeah. Musashi intentionally arrives to the island duel hours late. He shows up looking completely disheveled with a dirty towel wrapped around his head. And he isn't even carrying a real sword.
No, he's carrying a weapon he casually whittled out of a wooden boat oar during the ride over.
Every single element of that arrival was calculated to generate friction. The insulting delay, the unkempt appearance, the crude wooden weapon. It deeply offended Ganryu's rigid sense of order.
It broke his psychological timing completely. Furious and unbalanced, Genri swung his massive sword wildly, and he missed his target. Musashi effortlessly dodged and struck him down with the wooden oar.
Musashi survived because he continually zeroed out his own rules.
Exactly.
And it reminds me of this fable from Aesop mentioned in the text that perfectly captures this idea of situational identity. So, a bat is caught by a ferret.
Right.
The ferret announces it hates all birds and intends to eat him. The bat points to its fur and says, "Hey, I'm not a bird, I'm a mouse." The ferret agrees and lets him go.
It's a very clever bat.
Yeah. And then sometime later, the same bat is caught by a different ferret. This ferret declares it hates mice. The bat immediately spreads its leathery wings and says, "I am not a mouse, I am a bat," and survives again.
The bat survives through total cognitive flexibility. It refuses to be trapped by a singular definition.
But, that level of adaptability sounds great in a fable, but applied to a human mind, that requires a massive structural shift. I mean, how do you actually unlearn the rules that have kept you safe?
It helps to think of your mind like a complex machine learning algorithm. If you trained an algorithm purely on data from a decade ago, and then tasked it with navigating today's stock market, it would fail catastrophically.
Right, because the world has changed.
Exactly. The underlying machinery of the algorithm isn't broken, but the weights assigned to the old data are completely wrong for the current environment. You have to actively go into your own mind and zero out the weights of your past successes.
You have to force yourself to process the raw, live data directly in front of you without running it through the filter of how I did this last time. So if we apply Musashi to a modern career, it basically means being willing to murder your own signature style. Like, if you are an architect, renowned for brutalist concrete designs, and you are hired by a client who desperately needs a vibrant, organic space, clinging to your past awards and forcing concrete into the design, that is your Prussian parade formation.
Yes. You have to be willing to show up with a wooden boat oar if the situation demands it.
But I have to challenge this, because living like that sounds absolutely exhausting. If you strip away all your past rules, all your reliable formulas, and force yourself to constantly adapt to the chaotic, ever-changing present, the natural human response is terror.
Oh, it's incredibly intimidating.
So how do you keep from losing your mind and succumbing to panic when the pressure spikes and you have absolutely no script to rely on?
That is the ultimate dilemma of strategy, and it requires the deployment of the counterbalance strategy. When confronted with unexpected friction, a sudden setback, a betrayal, a collapsing market, your mind's natural gravitational pull is toward emotional imbalance.
Fear, doubt, hesitation.
Exactly. They flood the system. To counteract that, you must cultivate what strategists call presence of mind.
And to be clear, the text frames presence of mind not as some mystical innate talent you were simply born with, but as an active, deliberate tool you deploy.
It is a calculated counterbalance to the human tendency to either freeze and panic or retreat into extreme caution. And it is vital to recognize that in the middle of a conflict, caution is very often just a socially acceptable disguise for fear.
That's a great point.
Yeah.
And the sources outline two radically different methodologies for overcoming that fear. The first approach is what we can call hyperaggression.
Right.
And this is perfectly illustrated by Lord Nelson at the Battle of Copenhagen in 1801. Now, Nelson was famously fiery and instinct-driven, but his superior officer during the battle was Sir Hyde Parker. And Parker was highly methodical, deeply cautious, and fundamentally obsessed with maintaining good order.
Parker possessed the mindset of a peacetime administrator, which is catastrophic when plunged into the entropy of war.
Right. So the British fleet attacks the heavily fortified Danish defenses, and it instantly becomes this brutal, chaotic slugfest. Parker is watching the engagement from a safe distance, and his psychological resilience breaks. He just cannot handle the friction.
He panics.
Totally. He assumes they're losing, he panics about the preservation of the fleet, and he hoists signal flag 39, which is the absolute order to withdraw.
But Nelson, who is in the thick of the fight, understands the physics of combat. He knows that attempting a complex retreat under heavy fire will result in the total annihilation of his forces.
So the only way out is through.
Exactly. Momentum is his only defense.
And this is where it gets legendary. Nelson had previously lost the sight in his right eye. So when his lieutenant nervously informs him that Parker has raised the signal to retreat, Nelson calmly lifts his telescope, places it against his blind eye, and announces, "I really do not see the signal."
It's such an audacious move.
He deliberately ignores the order, pushes his ships forward with an insane surge of aggressive momentum, and within the hour, the Danish forces surrender.
Nelson utilized hyperaggression to artificially generate momentum, which served as a counterbalance to the terror of the moment. By moving faster and hitting harder, he denied himself and his men the luxury of hesitation.
Okay, that makes sense if you possess Nelson's adrenaline-fueled personality. But what if that simply isn't your temperament? I mean, what if you are inherently analytical?
Then you look to the second approach, which we'll call the detached Buddha. And the finest example of this comes from a totally different battlefield.
Hollywood.
Yes, with the legendary director Alfred Hitchcock.
The imagery associated with a movie set is usually one of sheer chaos. You picture a manic director screaming at extras, pulling their hair out as the budget balloons. But visitors to a Hitchcock set were famously bewildered.
They'd find him sitting in his director's chair, completely placid.
Yawning, occasionally dozing off while the cameras were rolling. He appeared utterly bored by the whole process.
He appeared bored because he was entirely detached from the immediate chaos. But that detachment was not apathy. It was the dividend paid by absolute obsessive preparation. Hitchcock treated the filmmaking process like a complex military logistics operation. Before a single physical frame was shot, he had mentally pre-edited the entire film. He generated exhaustive storyboards detailing the exact geometry of every camera angle, the specific lighting, the precise movement of every prop.
He aggressively front-loaded all the friction. The text notes his obsessive control even extended to wardrobe. In the film Vertigo, he forced actress Kim Novak to wear a very specific stiff gray suit.
And she hated it, right?
Oh, she completely hated it, complaining it restricted her movement. But Hitchcock didn't care about her comfort. He needed her to visually represent a woman who looked exactly as if she had just stepped out of the San Francisco fog. He solved the visual problem months before the camera even arrived.
The physical set was merely the printing press for a movie he had already shot in his head. Because he established totalitarian control during the preparation phase, when he finally stepped onto the chaotic battlefield of the set, he had the mental bandwidth to be the dozing Buddha.
Because a panicking producer or a temperamental actor could not shake his presence of mind. He had already mathematically solved the battle.
Exactly.
But I'm struggling to reconcile these two concepts, honestly. Nelson is relying purely on adrenaline, instinct, and forward momentum in the terrifying present. Hitchcock is relying on cold, calculated spreadsheets and storyboards built months in the past. They seem fundamentally at odds with one another.
They do appear mutually exclusive until you realize they represent two halves of a complete operational cycle. The synthesis is this. You must prepare intensely, obsessively, meticulously like Hitchcock. You front-load the friction and map out every variable you can control, buying yourself vast amounts of mental space. But the moment the actual engagement begins and the unpredictable variables of reality strike, you must instantly drop the careful spreadsheets.
You pivot.
You pivot, and you execute with the fearless, aggressive momentum of Lord Nelson. Preparation earns you the right to rely on instinct.
That is a really powerful synthesis. So let's just trace the arc of the entire journey we've taken to these sources today.
Let's do it.
We began by dismantling that childhood illusion of perfect harmony, accepting that everyday life is, in fact, a subtle psychological battlefield. We explored the polarity strategy, the uncomfortable necessity of using our enemies or defining what we deeply oppose to act as a compass and grant us clarity of purpose.
And from there, we examined the guerrilla war of the mind. We saw how rigid formulas destroyed the Prussians and how Miyamoto Musashi survived by continually zeroing out the weights of his past successes. We learned the absolute necessity of destroying our own signature styles to remain fluid in the face of friction.
And finally, we addressed the terror that accompanies that absolute fluidity. We learned to cultivate presence of mind by synthesizing Hitchcock's obsessive preparation with Nelson's hyper-aggressive momentum, ensuring we just don't freeze when the chaos hits.
If there is an overarching application to extract from all these strategies, it is that the active avoidance of conflict is a guaranteed recipe for personal and professional stagnation. We understand that children develop their personalities and social boundaries through the friction of play and minor disputes. Adults are really no different. We require resistance.
We need to grow.
We need opposing forces to remain intellectually sharp, strategically creative, and fully engaged with reality. Engaging with conflict rationally doesn't make you a malicious person. It makes you a highly capable one.
I want to leave you with a final, really fascinating observation from the source material to process on your own. During the intense desert campaigns of World War II, German Field Marshal Erwin Rommel fought against highly trained, veteran British tank units. But later in the war, he faced off against much greener, largely inexperienced American troops. And Rommel documented something that completely defied conventional military logic. He noted that the inexperienced Americans actually adapted to the fluid, high-speed, chaotic nature of desert warfare significantly faster than the highly educated British forces.
Because the British troops were mentally weighed down by years of rigid doctrine and, proper ways of fighting, Rommel's conclusion points to a profound psychological truth. He said, education is easier than re-education.
Education is easier than re-education. So, analyze your own life right now. Look critically at your career trajectory, your relationships, and the daily routines you rely on. What heavily ingrained education, what cherished rule, signature style, or past success are you stubbornly clinging to simply because it worked 5 years ago?
And what would happen if you had the courage to actively unlearn it today?
Because out there in the real world, the utopian promise of perfect harmony is just an illusion. The subtle war is happening, whether you participate or not. The only question is, are you prepared to navigate it?